Okay. Before I go on this live, honestly and truly, when I saw the Eckerd Connects headline, it really kind of threw me. Let me turn this truck off. It really kind of threw me because I actually was at one of those camps when I was like 12. I turned 13 when I was at that camp. And so I kind of got an insider view. Like I wasn't in their foster care thing, whatever that is. The Eckerd connects directly. But the Jack and Ruth Eckerd Foundation have a hand in a lot to do with troubled youths, foster care, children who are in like under court supervision through family courts. So if you really look into it, all their like programs like that, Eckerd Kids, Eckerd uh family youth camps that they changed the name of, um, it's all interconnected. They all work together. I was doing some looking earlier. Like it's been so long ago that I didn't even realize that the name had changed or that so many of the camps had closed, which is honestly a good thing. But I was doing some looking earlier, and I was starting to get an idea of how they connected, how one branch of the foundation plays off the other branch of the foundation. Now, some of you might be old enough to remember Eckerd Pharmacy with the blue letters, I mean, the blue logo with the white letters. I'm telling my age, but some of you might be able to remember that. Well, that pharmacy chain was sold by the Eckerds. Jack Eckerd was the second generation owner of Eckerd Pharmacy. He wasn't the founder. The founder's first name started with an M, and I cannot remember it off the top of my head. So he was the second generation owner of Eckerd Pharmacy. Eckerd Pharmacy went through a phase where it got split up um, by region, and subsequently, it ended up getting sold to Rite Aid Pharmacy. So that's what happened to Eckerd Pharmacy. Well, Jack and Ruth Eckerd started their foundation, and they got into helping kids. Now, I don't know anything about Jack and Ruth Eckerd, and so I'm not saying anything negative or bad about them. Just for the fact that they started these foundations, it seems that they really did have good intentions, that they really just wanted to help some kids, that they wanted to focus their time and monies on taking some troubled, possibly underprivileged children, giving them some skills, giving them uh, some therapy, some help to get your mind right and get your life straight. So I'm just gonna leave them in that category. That they're good people and they started out with good intentions. We all know that anytime something starts to grow, it can become its own separate beast. Now, I said that I was at that camp when I was like 12 and 13. And here's a little background. First, I want to tell you a little about the camp. Then I'll tell you a little bit about why I was in the camp. Well, the Eckerd Family Youth Camps were you were out in the woods, you built your own shelters, you had to cut the trees, skin the bark off them, cure them with turpentine, you had to design the plans for what type of tent you were going to build, whether it was an A-frame, a Hogan, a half Hogan, a TP, however you were going to do that. You had to actually go in and construct the tent, the shelter, or whatever the building was going to be used for. You had to drill the holes manually. They didn't have electrical tools. You had to drill the hole manually. You had to use dowel pegs, not nails. The only thing that you did not construct yourself was the floor to whatever the building was going to be. That was pre-constructed according to the size of the building. If you were going to build a tent that was 20 feet by 20 feet, they would order a pre-constructed 20-foot by 20-foot plywood or pressed wood uh, form, and they would come and set that form. You had to go in there before they got there, mark off the area that it was going to sit in, put in your posts. You had to dig the holes with post hole diggers, put in the posts um, that the floor was going to sit on because it was raised up. It wasn't directly on the ground. You had to construct the tents, put them together, notch whatever had to be notched, latch everything together with binder's twine. Um, the coverings, the walls and stuff of the tent were like, I've seen it referred to as canvas, but I didn't know that's what it was called. It really felt more like a really pliable, rubbery type material, and that would get placed and stapled to the frame of the building. The bottom half of the walls, if you want to call them that, and I'll show pictures of this kind of stuff when I do the live. The bottom halves of the walls were covered with that. The top halves of the walls were were open air, basically the windows. The door frame was open. That same rubbery material was used for the roof, and you would put it across the rafters, tie it in place, staple it where it needed to be stapled, and that was your roof. Now, in the wintertime, when it would get colder, we would get, I think they call it Tyvek now. It was Visqueen then. And that would cover the open spaces on the tents, like basically the window areas, to keep the cold breeze from coming through there so bad. And if I recall right, that's also what we use to cover the door to the tent as well. You had cots, kind of like if you ever watched Full Metal Jacket, kind of the cots that they had in their dorm, something like that, with the little mattress or whatever. In the summertime, well, actually year round, really, we had mosquito nets that we would hang above the tents that you could tuck in, to keep yourself from getting ate up by mosquitoes and whatever else is flying around out there. I'll get more into tent life in a minute because it can get terrifying. The bathroom in the campsite was basically a hole dug in the ground, a really big hole, with a wooden box like structure on top of it that had multiple holes cut in the top and a seat added to it that you could use. That was called the latrine tent. It was really disgusting. I'm going to tell you about that too. Now, every week there were campsite chores. I can't remember the exact names of all of them, but I remember the little thing that we had to remember it. It was called Train Red Pigs Climb Ladders. You had trails, Rex. C, I can't remember what that is. P, I can't remember. L was latrine. But basically, you rotated through the chores every week to take care of, as a group, to take care of the needs in the campsite, keeping the trails clean, keeping the latrine area maintained, chopping firewood, uh, ordering supplies from the wreck so that we could have them in campsite. 2 days out of the week, if I recall correctly, they called it cookout. But 2 days out of the week, we stayed in camp. 5 days out of the week, we went to what was called the Chuck Wagon. And we would go in there for breakfast, lunch, and dinner as a group. Everybody went. You did not get to opt out of that. You didn't have to eat, but you had to show up. So 2 days a week, we would have I believe it was called cookout, and you did everything in camp. You cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The week before, you would put together your menus of what you were going to make, whether it was, and you had to plan every meal and account for every person in the group, how many people you were feeding. That's including your campers, your counselors, which we called chiefs. Your campers, your counselors. If you were going to have like a special guest, like if the head chief was coming down to your campsite for a meal, then you had to account for that. You figure out what you're cooking. You figure out what you're going to need for the recipe. They had a form where you could order everything that you needed and it had prices. You had to tally the sheet, see how much it was going to cost, come up with a price per person, come up with a total price, and put your order in. Well, y'all forgive me. I'm out here sneaking a black. Okay, so on cookout, like I said, you're in camp, you cook breakfast. Oh, yeah, C was cooks. They were the people who were going to cook that week for cookout. Um, and P was pots. They were the people who did the cleaning of like the kitchen area because we had like a cooking tent and we had like a kitchen tent that had sink and running water. We had like the a tent that had like all our firewood and kindling and a tool tent that had all the tools, saws, awls, everything you needed in there. Uh, where was I at? So on cookout, everything was done in campsite. We really didn't go away from campsite for anything unless there was some type of activity planned. Like sometimes they did like a camp Olympics type thing one time where all the groups came together and competed and they would like mark off 50 yards. We do a 50-yard dash. They uh do capture the flag, have races and just different things like that. Just like camp wide events. So the only time you actually left your campsite during cookout is if they had something like that going. Sometimes they would have movie nights. Usually, if I recall correctly, movie nights were like not on cookout nights, but that's when you everybody would go to the Chuck Wagon, all the groups, and you would watch whatever it was, a TV show, a movie, a sporting event. I remember watching a football game there, and that's how I actually how it's a weird memory, but that's how Green Bay Packers became my favorite NFL team because I had no clue about football. They had a thing where we were watching the Super Bowl that year, and it's like 88 or 89, something like that, maybe 90. And they were like, whichever team, whichever group picks, who's going to win the Super Bowl will get this, whatever that special prize was. So I voted for Green Bay, and they won. They've just been my team ever since. First time I ever even really watched football. Didn't know a thing about it. Weird memory. Well, anyway, so that's like a basics of camp life. Oh yeah, and then they had chapel. So like twice a week you could go to chapel. That was something that you could opt in or out of. Um, Depending on how many people wanted to go, how many people wanted to stay in campsite. One or two counselors would either go to chapel with the ones who wanted to go or stay in camp with the ones who wanted to stay. And they split it up like that. Because usually we have like three counselors or chiefs in the campsite at the same time. Showers. I hated the showers because they were open community showers. So you had the campers and the adult counselors all in there just bathing together. Yeah. So there was that. Uh, what else can I tell you about the setup? Okay, the way it was organized, most of the camps were like male only camps. They only accepted boys. There was one in Inihasi, which I think is still open and running, that only accepted girls. And there were, I think, two or three that accepted both boys and girls. The one that I was at, Imashami, which is in Santa Rosa County, well, was in because it's been closed since 2013, was in Santa Rosa County, Florida. There were They separate the kids there into groups. Now, mind you, everything about this whole experience is supposed to be like Native American name based. So that's where the names of the camps like Imashami, Ininihasi, Ikelatu, Itumaki, all these came from like Native American names, place names, object names, phrases, whatever. And the groups at the camp they all carried an Indian name. The female group at Imashami was called Kakusas. I cannot remember what that means to save my life. I'm not going to try to look it up because it's probably going to be really hard to find. Some of the other groups there were Taikadas, which was like an in program group where when you've completed the program and you're ready to go home, you go there, and they called it the classroom group because they got you back up to par on your school levels, tried to get you back up to your grade level. They did the testing to find out what grade level you were on, what you needed to work on, blah, blah, blah. Some of the other boys groups that I can remember were, let's see, you had Takestas, Tarpons. Can't really remember a lot of those names. It's been like 30 years, folks. But anyway, so the groups didn't really interact. And the boys groups and the girl group were absolutely not supposed to interact at all. Around the chuck wagon, each group had a community tent. So you had like the chuck wagon building, and then in kind of a semicircle out front of that, or actually out back, but for us it was out front. Out front of the chuck wagon, you had like 6 or 7 tents, because I think they had 6 or 7 groups at Camp Imashami, and each group was for each tent was for a group, and that's where you waited whenever there was community activities. If you were waiting for chow time, your group would sit in their tent. If you were waiting for whatever else was going on in the community setting that you needed to be up there for. Um, the counselors. The counselors were called chiefs. Uh, each group had like 3 or 4 counselors with them, depending on the size of the group, because the boys groups tended to be bigger. You see them with 3 or 4 counselors all the time. The girls group tended to be smaller, so a lot of times we might only have 2 chiefs with us. Sometimes we would have 3, and the chiefs were there with us for like weeks on a time at a time. Like, let's say Chief, and I'm just throwing out a name here, Chief Deborah is coming on. She might be out there with us, living with us 24/7 in the campsite, at the property, whatever, and she's living with us for like 2 weeks straight, and then she'll get to be off for like a few days or a week. Then she'll come back and do it again, and they kind of rotated. They kind of staggered their days off. Uh, Experience at the camp. Now, Eckerd bounced back in the headlines because apparently the foster care branch of their foundation has is under criminal investigation for child abuse. And just glancing through the information, apparently, like, they had the kids sleeping in one of the foster care office buildings, sleeping under desks, sleeping on cots, unsupervised. There was something about one of the kids overdosing on prescription medication that they had access to, and I guess they shouldn't have had. Um, just different things that were going on there. Well, I was never a part of their foster care program, as I was saying. Mm. The way that I ended up, even at the camp, and I told you guys, you're going to end up hearing my whole story eventually. Not even sure that I really, well, never mind. Anyway, but you're going to end up hearing my whole story eventually. So here you're going to get part of it. I was a troubled youth, not in that I had crime problems or drug problems. I had behavioral issues. My behavioral issues were the direct result of sexual abuse that I had suffered from God as far back as I could remember, up until maybe kindergarten, first grade. It stopped, and then it ended up starting again at about the age of 11 with a different family member. So the behavioral issues based on that abuse is the reason that I ended up in the camp. Mind you, a lot of the kids that were in that camp, they were there for stuff like running away, using drugs, catching criminal charges, robbing people. It was just a variety of kids that were, doing stuff they really like, even illegal stuff. At that time, I had never been exposed to a lot of that. You have to understand, I was raised by a, a Baptist pastor and his wife. They were born in 1911 and 1914. So really old school, really sheltered, for the most part, really sheltered. I never was exposed to, other than my uncle drinking some beer at a barbecue. I had never seen anybody smoke weed. I didn't even know what weed was. I had never seen, people coming around like women half dressed, or it just wasn't the type of environment that I was in. So they put me in this camp with kids who have done everything under the sun. Not knocking them. They had issues too. It's just that it was different. It was totally different level of experiences. When you're putting a kid in a program, you kind of want to put them in a program that fits them, their behavior, and their needs. So here you have a church kid that's acting up because they were touched, and you throw them in with some kids, and a virgin, mind you, a virgin, and not exposed to any of this stuff, and you throw me here with kids who are running away, they're partying, they're drinking, they're using drugs, they're describing the experience of being high, they're talking about uh, being physically intimate with people, hotel room stuff, all types of things that I had never even really heard of, you know. So yeah, it was kind of a mess, and that's how I ended up at this camp. Now, in my reading today, I saw some of the descriptions online of what these camps in particular, because I did kind of focus in on the camps and not the rest of the Eckerd Foundation stuff. But I focused in on the camps because I have personal experience with that. And then one of the headlines caught my eye, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that happened." And I was reading the article. I'm getting like descriptions of what the camp is supposed to be on paper, and then I'm remembering what it actually was when I was there, and I'm like, you know what, that don't line up at all. That's nothing like what it is. When you read about it on paper, it says things like it's a therapeutic environment. Troubled children are offered therapy and coping skills, and they learn cause what was it, like cause and reaction, or they learn about consequences for their actions, and just all kind of stuff that really wasn't true. They're describing like backpack trips and camping and canoeing as if it's like summer camp or something, and it really was not like that. I mean, there were times in that camp where a lot of times the group would suffer for the actions of the one. Hey, I'm good, how are you? A lot of times in those camps, the group would suffer for the actions of the one. I remember one particular incident, and I'm not going to say anybody's names. I know it's been a long, long time ago. I doubt any of you would even know who I was talking about, even if I referred to them just as their first name. But I know, and I feel like because I'm talking about such a specific experience, that if they're out there and they happen to be watching this, they'll know that I'm talking about them. And I just don't want to do that to anybody. Everybody's story is their own to tell. Okay, there was one particular girl. whom I'll call Athena. Athena had been sneaking and talking to a boy in one of the groups, passing notes, eye contact, hand signals, all this stuff. And apparently, between the two of them, they had made a plan that they were going to run away together, do whatever they were going to do. They were going to leave the camp and all this. Well, Athena was from out of state, so it's not like she could run to a friend's house. Mind you, we were deep off in Blackwater River State Forest also, but it's not like we were totally far from civilization. It's not like she could just run away and call up a friend to come pick her up. The guy, I remember him and his name. I'll call him Desperado. So Athena and Desperado. Desperado was from the area because me and Desperado were from the same city, which was relatively close to where the camp was. Athena and Desperado ran away. So in the middle of the night, on a stormy night, the rest of the group was awakened from our beds, and they would do what they called huddles. Whenever someone had an issue, whether it was being disrespectful in the way that you're talking, not wanting to do your chores, not following directions, uh, talking about inappropriate subject matter, whatever it was, we would do what was called a huddle. We would stop wherever we were. If we were walking down one of the trails in the woods, we'd stop, step off the trail, get in a circle, and we would talk about whatever the issue was. Well, they woke us all up out of our bed. God, it had to be like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had to do a huddle. So we all quickly got dressed. It was kind of cold because it was later in the year. It was raining. And I mean, it was raining, raining, not sprinkling, but it was raining, raining. And we get in a huddle. And because Athena had run away, we had to talk about the issue, even though Athena was not there. So we're all sitting out in the rain, cold, talking about something none of us really knew anything about. None of us knew she was passing notes. None of us knew she was going to run away. None of us knew why she ran away, other than none of us wanted to be there. So we're all out there talking about these theoretical reasons that we're out here in this huddle in the rain in the middle of the night. Occasionally, we would get updates from one of the chiefs. Oh, they can't find them. The police are looking for them. This, that, or the other thing. They eventually find them. They had run away together and met up at an abandoned campsite because apparently there was a group there before that they had shut down. They weren't using that group anymore. So they had run away and met up at this abandoned campsite. And they were caught eventually, hours and hours later, at that abandoned campsite, doing what boys and girls do when they run away together. I should have brought a soda. I didn't think I was going to be on here this long. Well, so they finally get Athena back to the group, and we're sitting out here in the cold, in the rain, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And of course, she's upset because whatever she's going through, and the fact that she ran away and they brought her back, and she has a whole attitude going on, and she doesn't want to talk about this. And the thing about the huddles are, you could not leave the huddle until the problem was properly addressed. So whether that took 10 minutes for someone to be able to express what it was that they did, what they were going through, how their actions should have been opposed to how they were, and what they can do in the future to make it better or to prevent that problem again. You could not leave the huddle until these issues were addressed. So we're sitting out there for hours. The sun is coming up. Athena's cussing us all out. People are going in on her, cussing her out, calling her everything they could think of. Counselors are saying things that you should not, absolutely never say to kids, especially vulnerable, troubled young females. I specifically remember one of the counselors saying to Athena, how she was stupid to run away with Desperado because all he sees when he looks at you is a walking vagina. And that's literally what she said. She didn't say the other word. She literally said that exact phrase. And so we sat out there. We ended up missing breakfast. They eventually will feed you the meal that you missed, but you can't leave the huddle to go to the chow hall to have your meal. You can't do anything except be in this huddle until the problem is properly addressed. So we're sitting out here, it's still raining. We're out in the woods in the middle of the night. The sun is coming up. Athena is still going off on everybody, is still not wanting to talk. So we're just sitting there for hours and hours and hours. I believe we sat in that huddle for every bit of 14 hours. It was well after lunch before we were able to leave. And these are some of the types of things that you had to go through out there. There were no classes. There was no daily schooling. I saw where in one of the news articles I was reading, it was saying that they're required to provide 30 to 33 hours per week of academic instruction. Now that article was actually talking about a camp in North Carolina because they were at that time they were across the country. It wasn't just isolated to one state or one city. They had several, they would have like 6 or 7 camps in a bunch of different states. Well, there was no education for the most part while you were in the program, and you could be in the program up to 2 years. There was even one person that was there when I was there who had been there longer than 2 years. They had made special exceptions for this person because this person at the end of the original 2 years felt like they were so close to whatever improvement that they wanted to stay there and finish out the program, with flying colors. So that was a special exception. But you could be there up to 2 years. And for up to 2 years, you weren't getting any type of educational stimulation. You were chopping trees and building tents, building fires, being creative with the way you set up your starter wood and your kindling, talking about other people's problems. And it was awkward because my problems were nothing like their problems. They would talk about running away, the things that they did when they ran away. They would talk about getting high and drinking, and I had no input on that. But yet I was expected to uh, participate in these conversations. The other thing about what I was reading online is they were saying that it's a therapeutic environment. And from my personal experience, I found nothing therapeutic about it. There were no therapy services uh, available. It's not like a program where once a week or so you would go in and talk to an actual counselor or something. The people that were hired as chiefs, who were the counselors who directly interacted with you in the campsite on a daily basis, living with you, these were not psychologists and psychiatrists or therapists or educators. This was just average Joes who applied for a job. Recalling conversations with some of the counselors there was one or two. There was a female counselor whose name started with a J, and I recall her saying that she was going to school for psychology. There was another female counselor whose name started with an S who had been some type of therapist. That counselor actually ended up marrying one of the male counselors whose name started with an R. And he used to come over to our community center to talk to her. And I remember him talking to us, and we were asking him questions and stuff. And from everything that he said that I can recall, he was just a guy who liked to go camping and who liked kids. like helping kids. He had no type of accreditations or anything. The backpacking, the camping, the canoe trips, we did actually do all that stuff, but it was not as, excuse me, oh, excuse me, it was not as lighthearted and free spirited uh as it sounds when you read it in these news articles. Um, I remember we went on a canoe trip for 14 days down the Cahaba River. Mind you, I'm from an area with plenty of beaches, but I'm not really a good swimmer. I don't really do water. Never been in a canoe before. Preparation for the trip entailed maybe 7 or 8 lessons on the different paddle strokes for steering a canoe, turning it, making it move forward, making it move backwards, holding steady in one spot. Uh, I believe we did CPR training, and then we went on a river for 14 days. I read in the comments of one of the news articles where someone was talking about this specific thing, and I was like, you know what, you're spot on. Because she was saying how, and she was apparently in one of the girls' groups, she was saying how there was absolutely nothing fun about it. You had 13 menstruating young girls plus 3 adult counselors who were unable to bathe in the river because of the current and the swelling of the river. You didn't have access to regular bathrooms and showers because you were literally canoeing down the river until a certain time of the day, and then you made a camp on the side. And then in the morning, you uncamped, got back on the river, and canoed some more. You didn't have access to facilities. There were times that I was almost bitten by a snake in the campsite and on that canoe trip. On that canoe trip in particular, a water moccasin, don't even know where it came from, started swimming towards the canoe, struck the canoe twice in rapid succession. And when it went to strike the third time, it missed the canoe and came over the top. And I could feel the wind from the snake's body as it flew across my arm. That close. Out in the middle of nowhere on the Cahaba River, can you imagine getting bitten by a water moccasin? There were incidents where counselors had relationships with campers. Most of it was kept on the hush. It didn't happen frequently while I was there, but I can remember at least 2 of the female counselors who would say and do inappropriate things with some of the girls, especially shower time, because it was communal shower, open communal shower. Like I said, we all showered right there together, adults and kids. Um, it just was not a very overall, it was not a very awesome experience whatsoever. I will say that I learned some things. If I ever end up stuck out in the woods, I can kind of fend for myself. I can build myself a shelter. Uh, I somewhat learned to budget and plan a meal, but in all honesty, it's nothing like what it's portrayed to be. And so I have to think that the fluff in the descriptions um of the other programs and things that they have going on is just that it's fluff. From my personal experience with the youth camps, I just don't see how it could be any different within the same organization. And mind you, I don't think it's necessarily intentional thing because I know that most of the counselors, most of the chiefs that I encountered there, they seemed like really good people. They seemed like they really just wanted to help these kids. They seemed dedicated. You had a few bad apples, but you're always going to get that. Now, I would assume that the same would be true in the other aspects of the foundation and the foster care and they have some other like residential academic facilities. I would assume the same would be there. Most of the people there aren't intentionally, they didn't go into this job for any reason other than to help some kids. But they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In order for those kids to be found living in what the Pinellas County Sheriff's the Pinellas County Sheriff called it deplorable conditions that they were living in the foster care offices. In order for those kids to be living in those type of conditions in the office of a foster institution says a lot. That means a lot of people who went into the field or got their jobs with good intentions had to kind of ignore some stuff. Kind of that no, they had to straight up ignore some stuff because you can't work in a building where kids are living, like living, and not know that kids are living there, not know that they're living in filth, not knowing that they're sleeping under desks. You can't. Okay, so there was my personal experience with Eckerd, and that at the time it was called Eckerd Family Youth Camps. It's called Eckerd Alternative Eckerd Youth Alternatives now. I'm not gonna do the live tonight. I'm going to do the live tomorrow night. And since I've already kind of told my personal little survivor story, and I know some other people who were there. I know that some people personally. I am talking to them. I'm wanting them to get on here and share their experiences as well, the good and the bad. The one person, they may. We'll see what he says. Uh, but I really want to get them to come on and share because this is kind of something that really kind of needs to be addressed and looked at because this isn't just an Eckerd thing. This is going on with so many different foundations and organizations on a regular basis. And even in the Isabella Kalua case, we can see where there's some kind of corruption going on in the foster care system. So it's obviously not just uh, one organization. It's not just one group or one person. So anyway, in the live, I'm not going to really go in depth in the survivor uh, information because I just went through that here to kind of brush off my nerves. I am going to talk to you in depth about the program. I'm going to share some stories with you from different camps that they ran. There have been some horrible stories, including deaths at some of these camps. Um, I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes things just make you scratch your head. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Come back for the walkthrough on the information about the Eckerd Foundation and their Eckerd Family Youth Camps.